time. When beginning your canning, it's important to begin with a clean canner and utensils. Even if you clean them before storing them away from the previous year, you still want to make sure that you clean them again. After you've cleaned your canner, your jars, your lids, and your rings, you want to add 2 to 3 inches of water to the canner and set aside. Next, make sure you add your rack to the bottom of the canner. This allows to keep the jars from getting too hot against the surface of the bottom, and that way they don't bust. When using the pressure canner, you also want to make sure that your jars are hot. So you want to fill them about halfway full with water and then place them in the canner and then turn on the heat for the canner to begin heating up the water both in the canner as well as in the jars. If you choose to fill the jars up all the way with water, you will need to dump some of that water out before adding your vegetables. You want to bring your canner over to the stove top. You can either do this by the canner by itself and then put the jars in separately, or bring them over like I did all together. Turn your burner on to a simmer and place the lid on top of your canner to keep the warmth in. While you're letting the jars warm up, this is a great time to rinse off your green beans and get all that dirt and grime off of them that may have been on them from the garden. Prior to rinsing, you will need to remove the stems from the bean. This is a great time to sit around with the family, chat, talk, have some laughter, and just really enjoy one another as you work on the beans. You can either leave your beans long, or you can break them in half or in smaller pieces like I did. Place your rinsed beans into a container and set aside. Continue this process until all of your beans have been rinsed and ready to be canned. Begin removing your jars one at a time for the canning process. We will fill each one individually and place it back into the hot water. We will begin with the cold packing method, as we will go over both cold packing and hot packing during this video. It is okay to can green beans using both methods. When you cold packing is taking the green beans in their natural state and putting them in the jar as they have not been warmed or cooked or heated up in any way prior to placing them in the jars. You're going to add your salt, which is a teaspoon of salt, to the jar, your green beans. I also, for a tip, have noticed if you have a little bit of water in the bottom to begin with, your beans will kind of fall in place a little bit easier using the cold method. The hot water that I used in the bottom of the jar was from the water that I had placed in them before putting them in the canner to get warm. If you filled your jar up all the way, that is when you would take some of that water out before putting your green beans in the jar. You want to make sure your jar is nice and full of green beans, and you want to add water. You want to make sure you add water and leave 1 inch of head space. You want to take your debubbleizer and push it up and down on all the sides of the jars, the middle of the jar, and you'll see the green beans kind of reposition themselves. At this point, you may actually notice that the liquid and green beans may have dropped a little bit in the jar after removing the air, and you may need to add some more water at this time to reach that 1 inch of head space. Head space is very important for the process. You really want to make sure you know exactly how much head space you need for what you're using and what you're making. After getting your head space correct, you then want to continue on by wiping down the rim around your jar, because you don't want any substance or stickiness around the rim that's going to collect on there and cause you possibly not to have a sealed jar. You're then going to take your magnetic wand and remove your jar lids from the hot water. Place your band on top of the jar and twist it on finger tight. You're then ready to place your jar into the canner. Grabbing your tongs to keep yourself from burning yourself, you're going to lift the jar and place it into the canner, and then remove the next jar and continue with this process. Repeat until all 7 jars are filled and ready to go. Place your last filled jar into the canner. Once you have placed your last filled jar into the canner, you're going to put the lid on and seal it. Then you're going to turn up your heat if needed and wait for steam to come out of the top. Once you have a good hard steam coming out of the top, you're going to set your timer for 10 minutes. Once your timer has gone off, you're going to put your weight on top of the canner. Make sure you know what elevation you are and how much weight you're going to need. I need 10 pounds of pressure. Once your weight has begun to rock back and forth, you will also notice that your pressure indicator has popped up. This lets you know that you have reached that 10 pounds of pressure, or 15 depending on where you live. You're then going to set your timer for 25 minutes, and the weight is going to rock back and forth for the full processing time. Once your timer has gone off, you're then going to turn off the heat to your stove. You're going to allow your pressure canner to depressurize on its own. I often tend to slowly move it over to a cooler burner just because I have an electric stovetop, but this is not a requirement, and it's just something I do because I feel like it helps a little bit. So you're going to let it depressurize on its own. Eventually that weight is going to stop rocking, and your pressure indicator is going to drop down. At this time, you're going to then remove your weight and let it sit for another 5 minutes. You're then going to remove the lid, and when you open it, make sure you open it so that the inside of the lid is facing away from you. This allows the steam to go outwards away from you instead of up into your face. Then you're going to use your canning tongs and you're going to remove your jars one at a time. You want to make sure that you place them on a towel or other kind of surface similar to a towel that doesn't allow for the cold countertop to touch the hot jars and risk them breaking. You will notice with the cold pack method that the green beans have floated pretty high up to the top. This happens because of the oxygen that is inside of the green bean structure prior to the canning process. With the cold pack method, you are unable to remove this extra oxygen before you can. Let's begin with the hot packing method. You want to put your green beans into a pot and fill it with water. You're then going to put it on the stove and bring it to a boil. Once your beans have reached a good rolling hard boil, you're going to let them boil for 5 minutes. You will notice during this time that your green beans will become more pliable, and a lot of that oxygen that was inside of the green bean structure has been released. And you will notice that when it comes to packing your green beans, you're going to have a lot more ability to pack them tighter. That was one heavy pot of green beans. Thanks to the hubby for moving them over nice and safe for me. We are now going to repeat the exact same steps that we did with the cold packing method. You have some hot water in the bottom of your jar. You're going to add the green beans. You're also going to add a teaspoon of salt. As you're adding your green beans, Again, you're going to notice they're a lot more pliable and you're going to be able to pack a lot more green beans into the jar. This is also nice because when you do the hot pack method, you can actually fit more green beans into one jar, which means that you're actually using less jars when packing your green beans. Both methods are right to do. You just have to pick which one you like, or maybe just experiment with both, like I did. I did both packing methods when I did my bushel of green beans. You're also going to want to make sure that you debubblize the water in the jar, and you're also going to want to make sure you add enough water and green beans to still equal that 1 inch of headspace. Once you have reached that, you continue to do just like we did before, wiping off the rim, adding the lid, as well as adding the ring and placing them into the canner. Place your jar in the canner and process just as you did for the cold pack method, letting it sit and steam for 10 minutes. Then after your weight begins to rock, you want to process your jars for 25 minutes. Then allow it to depressurize and then remove the lid and jars. And yummy, yummy green beans. I really hope you enjoyed this instructional video. If you did and you want to subscribe, that would be wonderful. We would love to have you as a subscriber. Also, if you have any questions or even comments, please leave them in the comments section below. I am looking forward to having you for Canning 106 as we adventure into steam canning. If you like this video, I encourage you to subscribe as well as share our videos. Subscribing to our channel as well as sharing our videos is the best way for you to help us here on our homestead. Thank you for hanging out with me today, and until next time, many blessings.